So you might have thought that we were done with everything now after the universe, but there's really one more card that has to be talked about after the universe card. And this card could be called the Master. The Master doesn't show up in most tarot decks, and there's a reason for that. Is that in fact the Master is represented in the tarot deck by the Fool. And so here we come back to the Fool card. And this is because after this big experience, this transcendent experience of enlightenment, after becoming the master of the temple, the step isn't complete until you have a process of return, until you have returned back to where you began. And now the master is once again the fool. After having gone through all of this, after having been the magician, been the lovers, been everything else, he returns to being the fool, only now he's not the same fool that he was before. He's fundamentally different. I'd spoken in the previous video about how the universe contains within it all the other cards of the tarot. So everything exists within that universe, in that concept of universal enlightenment. And so of course the Fool is there too, and that is what the aspirant to initiation was at the beginning, and it's what he is after he's done. No fundamental state has actually changed in this process. So the way to understand this, or what's important about this, has to do with how people perceive spiritual work and spiritual discipline. Many people think of spiritual work sort of like if you're going through grades in school, and then you get into grade 4, you study really hard, you do some tests, and when you're done, you're not a grade 4 anymore. You've left grade 4 forever, and now you're in grade 5. You finished kindergarten and you're in grade 1. You finish high school and now you get to go to college. They have this perception that spiritual development is based on a series of progressive states that essentially replace each other like they were titles. But when you consider the nature of the universe as defined in models like the tarot, the tree of life of the Kabbalah, and many others, you see that in fact this spiritual concept, this awakening concept, is existing in all of these different levels all at once. And the question is of people associating with them. But being able to perceive yourself at a different level doesn't mean that what was there before has ceased to be. So what this means is that you have to conceive of it with a different perspective. And it can be understandable why people who are doing a spiritual discipline would want to see this kind of progressive state as their understanding of spiritual growth. Because in a lot of cases, that's what it feels like. You have this earth-shattering experience, and suddenly you think like you're a completely different person. You've left that old thing behind, and now you're not the dumb, ignorant person you were once, and now you've got true wisdom and all these sorts of things. But in fact, this is completely a temporary effect that you have shifted your center of perception from one dimension to another dimension. So before you had a perspective of yourself in the sphere of Malkuth, and now you have it in the sphere of Yesod. And so just like before, you couldn't possibly conceive of being, or maybe even of there existing something up there, Now you want to imagine that you can't conceive of yourself as being down there. But the way to look at it, a better model maybe to understand it, is of states that all exist all at once, and that we are in all of them. So that, for example, a person will get married, and getting married means that now they're a wife, but it doesn't stop them from also being a daughter. And later, if they have a child, they're a mother, but they're also still a wife, and they're also still a daughter. And all of these states, all of these roles exist at the same time, but they just represent different facets of this person's existence. Similarly, the states that you can talk about, the spiritual perspectives from which we look at things, are actually better described in a sense of our relationship to the universe, rather than of some kind of progression of illumination or something like that. Before, you might not have been able to conceive of yourself as an awakened person, or if you did, you could only think of it in abstract terms or as something very distant. But now, you look at yourself after your awakening, and you can see that this is something that you were all along. And you also look at the person that was the aspirant, the person that was before they were even initiated, before they even began their spiritual quest, and you realize that person was already existing in this state of enlightenment. They just didn't realize it yet. And that this person that's in the state of enlightenment is also still in that state of the aspirant. So none of these things are supplementary. They don't replace each other. They're cumulative. And so this path of return is very important, because it is this step of becoming once again the person that you were right at the beginning, only now with this whole shift, this whole transformation. Some people say that the tarot is cyclical. Actually, I think that this particular deck captures the imagery of the Fool very, very nicely, because as you can see, he's constantly going around, but it's not in cycles exactly, it's in spirals. It's a spiral progression, so that you do end up in the same place you were before, but you're at another height than where you were before. And yet you're still in the same place, and you can see down there that there's that same person still existing in the same way. It's a constant cycle that goes from wisdom and to folly, and then back to wisdom, and then back to folly. And at each stage, it transforms the participant. And so this is very important to understand, because it's because of this cyclical nature of spiritual growth that the tarot is useful not just for what I've been talking about in this whole series, which is the path to spiritual transformation. The cycles are cycles that repeat themselves in little ways all through our lives, and they repeat themselves in all kinds of aspects of our lives. So you can look at the same archetypes, those archetypes that you see in the tarot that are primarily being discussed in this series from the point of view of spiritual transformation, of awakening and enlightenment. And you can look at them as how they would apply in every other aspect, and all the other ways that you act in cyclical ways, going from folly to wisdom and back to folly and back to wisdom, and changing but remaining the same. So that the Fool, the Hierophant, the Chariot, the Death card, the Devil, all of these, and the pattern of movement that they represent, is applied in all aspects of life. This path of returning can be seen as a backwards progression through the major arcana. And it's symbolized in Hermetic teaching through these two concepts of the serpent and the dove. The serpent is that force of awakening that moves up, the kundalini, that moves up from the bottom towards the top. And it progresses to the height while remaining in the bottom. The tail of the serpent is still at the base of the tree. The head of the serpent is now at the crown. And then the dove is that return, that the dove emanates flying downwards, floating downwards, carrying down this grace through all the universe from the crown down to the foundation. The dove then is what you can call this spiritual grace, and it's that force of enlightenment that is within all things. If there wasn't that enlightenment already in all things, then all things couldn't become enlightened. So enlightenment can happen because it already has. I may do one more video in this tarot series before putting it all to a close, where I can try to explain a bit more about this path of return and how to look at the arcana in the opposite direction.